The Coron Dominion survey listed Venice as a decorative settlement. No roads, no army, a population distracted by masks and music. 6 hours later, that same report was read aloud at a tribunal, as evidence, while the officer who wrote it stared at the floor and said nothing. If you enjoy stories where humans win in the strangest way possible, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me which moment made you laugh the hardest. Your comment genuinely helps this channel grow, and I read every single one. Now let's step into the fog, onto the water, and into the strangest invasion in recorded history. Venice does not work the way other cities work. And every invasion manual ever written assumes otherwise. There are no roads, not narrow roads, not bad roads, none. There are 150 canals, more than 400 bridges, and a maze of stone alleys called calli, some of which are barely wide enough for one person carrying a bag of bread. The city sits on wooden pilings driven into mud 1,000 years ago. It is surrounded by a lagoon that looks like open water and is, in most places, about knee-deep. The deep channels are marked by brickle, which are bundles of wooden posts hammered into the lagoon floor. Every boat captain in Venice knows the same rule, and they learn it before they learn to swim. Stay inside the posts. Outside the posts there is no water, there is only soup. On the last Saturday of February, 100,000 people came to Venice for the opening of Carnival. Almost all of them were wearing masks. Marco Bellini was on the water by 6 in the morning, as he had been for 41 years. He was 61 years old, thick through the shoulders, and he rowed standing up because that is the only way a gondolier has ever done it. His hands had permanent grooves in them from the oar. He had 2 rules for tourists: do not stand up and do not ask him to sing. His nephew Nico Bellini, 24, sat in the front of the boat with a laptop balanced on his knees. Nico had come back from Milan 6 months earlier, after learning that a degree in audio engineering qualified him to carry speaker cases up staircases. This year, the Carnival committee had finally given him a real job. He was running sound for the opening ceremony in St. Mark's Square. "Uncle, the mixing desk is 30 years old," Nico said. It works the way a bridge works when it is on fire." Marco steered around a moored barge without looking. "Then fix it." "That is why they pay you. They pay me in lunch, then eat well." By 8, the square was filling. Elena Rossi opened her Baccaro 2 streets behind the Rialto Bridge. A small wine bar with 6 stools, 1 crooked shelf, and a ceiling she had personally painted 3 times. Elena was 58, silver-haired, and had run that room for 26 years. She could end an argument with 1 look and start a better one with 2. Ray Halstead was already sitting at her bar, which was impressive, because she had not opened yet. Ray was 63, a retired United States Navy chief who had come to Venice for a 2-week holiday 20 years earlier and simply never went home. He drank his coffee the way he did everything else, slowly and without explaining himself. "You are early," Elena said. "You were slow. The door was locked. It was a suggestion." Across the Grand Canal at the Rialto Fish Market, Bruno Fanti was laying out sea bass on crushed ice. Bruno was 55, loud, and had been arguing with the city about his stall permit for 9 years. A gray cat named Fumo sat on the corner of his table, as Fumo did every morning, contributing nothing. On the island of Murano, Sofia Conti opened her furnace door and checked the glass. The furnace ran at over 1,000 degrees. It had not been switched off in 11 years, because switching it off would crack the lining, and because her grandfather had told her that a cold furnace is a closed business. In a workshop near San Barnaba, Rosa Vital, 71, was finishing the last of 600 masks, plain white Bauta masks. Papier-mâché, no decoration, the classic Venetian face that covers everything and reveals nothing. 600 was a small run for her. She had made 4,000 that season. Gianni Moro, 38, was under the engine cover of his water taxi, swearing in 3 dialects because the starter had died again. And in the bell chamber of the St. Mark's Campanile, 98 meters above the square, Tomas Neri was doing what he did every carnival morning. Tomas was 74. He had been the bell keeper for 30 years before the city moved the bells to electric motors, and now he was officially a volunteer, which meant he did the same job for free and complained about it more. He checked the great bell, the one Venetians call the Marangona. He checked the manual pull ropes that nobody had used since 1994. Then he went down to have a coffee because the ceremony did not start until noon. At 11:55, the square was packed shoulder to shoulder. The flight of the angel was about to begin, the moment when a performer descends on a steel wire from the top of the campanile down to the center of the square. It is the official opening of Carnival. It has happened in one form or another for roughly 500 years. Nico raised his hand to the sound desk, and the sky went dark. It did not go dark the way clouds do. It went dark in a straight-edged line, sliding over the Doge's palace, over the basilica domes, over the crowd. A vast black disk, half a kilometer across, with 3 downward spines and blue light glowing along its underside. The vibration in the air made the water in the canals shiver. The crowd looked up. Then 100,000 people, all wearing masks, began to applaud. They thought it was part of the show. Nico stared at his laptop. The audio feed had picked up something underneath the vibration, a low pulse, steady and deep, sitting almost exactly where a bass note sits. He turned the gain down. The pulse stayed. Up in the campanile stairwell, Tomas felt the great bell hum against his hand without anyone touching it. And out on the lagoon, 3 landing craft dropped through the fog, ignored every wooden marker post in the water, and came down exactly where no boat in Venetian history had ever gone. The first landing craft touched down in St. Mark's Square itself, directly on the paving stones, 40 meters from the basilica. The ramp opened. 6 Koran soldiers came out. They were close to 7 feet tall in dark bronze armor with 4 narrow arms and long helmets full of green lenses. Their weapons hummed. They fanned out in a textbook containment formation, exactly as they had done on 19 other worlds. The crowd applauded harder. Somebody whistled. A man in a plague doctor mask shouted, "Bravo," and lifted his phone. Captain Dral had led ground assaults on 4 planets. He had personally witnessed populations run, kneel, scream, and in one memorable case, faint in a coordinated wave. He had never in his career been clapped at. He raised his weapon and projected the standard announcement. "People of this territory, your world is now the property of the Koran Dominion." The applause got louder. A woman near the front in a gold Volto mask raised her hand politely. "Excuse me, what time is the next performance?" Dral's translator took 4 seconds. "There is no performance, so this is the only one. This is a military occupation. Then it is very good," Dral fired into the air. The blue bolt went up between the pillars and cracked against the sky. "Carnival has fireworks." The crowd cheered. Behind the barrier, Nico Bellini was the only person in that square who understood exactly what he was hearing, and it was not because he was brave. It was because his headphones were still on. The alien weapon discharge had put a spike through his monitor feed, and the spike had a shape. Machine noise, not pyrotechnics. He pulled the headphones off and said quietly to nobody, "That is not the show." The second landing craft came down 200 meters north, on the Riva, and clipped the corner of the Rialto fish market on the way in. It flattened Bruno Fanti's stall. 9 years of permit applications, 3 appeals, 1 hearing that had been postponed twice because the relevant official was on holiday. 200 kilos of ice, 40 kilos of sea bass, and 1 table that Bruno's father had built by hand in 1968. Bruno stood in the wreckage, covered in crushed ice, and looked at the ship. Fumo the cat had jumped clear and was already sitting on a bollard, watching with the calm interest of an animal who does not pay rent. A Koran trooper walked down the ramp and stopped in front of Bruno. "This zone is now under Dominion control." Bruno pointed at the ground. "You landed on my stall. Your concerns are irrelevant. You do not have a permit." The trooper's helmet lenses shifted. "A what?" "A permit for the Riva for a commercial vehicle." 9 years I have been trying to get one for a table, and you land a spaceship and nobody says anything. Submit or be destroyed." Bruno took out his phone and called Marco Bellini. Marco answered from his gondola. "Yes, they landed on the stall." "Who did?" "The aliens." "Which stall?" "My stall, Marco, the stall." There was a long, thoughtful pause on the line. In the background, Marco's oar could be heard turning in the forcola. "Your father's table, splinters." "Ah," said Marco, "yes. Then we will have to deal with them." He hung up. The Choron had conquered 19 inhabited worlds using a strategy that took about 6 hours. Land near the population center, cut communications, cut power. Broadcast demands until local leadership surrendered. At 12:15, they cut the power to Venice. It went almost unnoticed. Half the workshops in the old city ran on generators anyway, because the wiring was ancient and the flooding was regular, and losing power in Venice in February is not an emergency. It is a Tuesday. At 12:20, they jammed the mobile network. This also failed to produce panic, because with 100,000 visitors in the city, the mobile network had already collapsed on its own at 9:10. At 12:30, Sub-Overseer Talek reported to the command ship that the population had not surrendered, had not fled, and appeared to be filming. Aboard the Sovereign Reach, Overseer Karn studied the readouts. Karn was tall even for a Choron, and he had earned his command by being the only officer in his cohort who had never lost a ground engagement. He had a very simple philosophy. Fear is faster than force. Show them something they cannot fight and they will hand you the planet. Why are they not dispersing? He said. Analyst Peth checked the feeds twice before answering, which was a habit he had developed because Karn did not enjoy being told things twice. Overseer, the population appears to be celebrating. Celebrating what? Us, Karn turned. Explain. Cultural analysis indicates the settlement is currently hosting an annual event involving costume, music, and public spectacle. Our arrival is being interpreted as part of the event. Then correct the interpretation. The correction did not go the way anyone expected, and the reason was masks. At 12:40, Captain Dral ordered his squads to move out of the square and secure the surrounding districts. They advanced into the Cali, the narrow stone alleys that thread through the old city like cracks in a plate. The alleys of Venice were laid out before anyone had invented the wheelbarrow. Some of them are less than 70 centimeters wide. The Choron combat armor, with its forearm mounting yokes and shoulder plating, was 110 centimeters across. Squad 9 entered the Cal Varisco at 12:42 and stopped moving at 12:43. They did not stop because of resistance. They stopped because they were wedged. Trooper Wren, who was at the front, attempted to reverse. The soldier behind him had already attempted to advance. The result was the first documented incident in Choron military history of a fully armed assault squad being defeated by architecture. A man walked past them, sideways, holding a tray of coffee. He said, "Permesso," which is what Venetians say when they need to get past you, and he got past them, and he did not spill anything. Dral pulled the squad back to the wider streets and reported the obstruction. He also reported, with growing unease, that his soldiers could no longer identify individual humans. "Explain that," Karn said. "Overseer, our targeting system tags hostiles by facial structure." "Yes, they do not have faces." Karn looked at the feed. 10,000 identical white Bauta masks. Blank, smooth, eyeless. Every single one exactly the same, because Rosa Vital and 11 other workshops had been making that exact mask in that exact shape for 400 years. The targeting system was showing every human in Venice as the same person. "Then tag them by clothing," Karn said. Peth swallowed. "Overseer. They are all in costume." At the same moment, 3 streets behind the Rialto, Sergeant Vex kicked open the door of a small wine bar, walked in with 4 soldiers, and announced that the building was now a Dominion command post. Alina Rossi was standing behind her bar with a cloth in her hand. She had just finished cleaning the ceiling. "No," Alina said. Vex's translator processed this. "The structure is required. The structure is mine. You will evacuate." Ray Halstead did not turn around on his stool. He looked at Alina instead. "Are they buying anything? They did not even close the door." "In February," Ray said. "That is just rude." Vex fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The bolt punched through plaster, blew a hole the size of a dinner plate, and brought down a shower of dust, paint flakes, and a small framed photograph of Alina's father, which hit the floor and cracked across the glass. The room went completely silent. Alina looked up at the hole, then down at the photograph, then at Vex. The Choron sergeant did not understand human expressions. But something in the back of his nervous system, something older than his species' first spacecraft, quietly informed him that he had made an error. You, Elena said, have damaged my ceiling. Ray put his coffee down and stood up. The occupation of Elena Rossi's Baccaro lasted 14 seconds. One soldier went backward over a table. One discovered that a 26-year-old bar stool, swung correctly, transfers a remarkable amount of energy into a knee joint. One tried to bring his weapon around in a room with a 2-meter ceiling and learned that 4 arms are a liability indoors. Ray got Vex's weapon arm, turned it against the bar, and put him down on the tiles. He did not say anything while he did it. He had done this professionally for 31 years, and he had never seen the point of talking during it. The last Koran ran out the door and did not look back. Elena inspected her ceiling. I am charging somebody for that. Ray picked up the alien rifle and turned it over. I do not think they take card. Then we keep the spaceship. By 2 in the afternoon, 11 people were sitting in Rosa Vidal's mask workshop with the shutters down, surrounded by 4,000 blank white faces hanging from the walls. Marco Bellini had brought his oar. Bruno had brought his gutting knife and a great deal of anger. Sofia Conti had come across from Murano in Gianni's water taxi, which had started on the 4th attempt. Nico had his laptop at 19% battery. Tomas Neri had walked because he did not trust boats, which is an unusual position for a Venetian and one he had never explained. Ray laid the captured rifle on the table. What do we know? Sofia said. Nico turned his laptop around. I recorded their broadcast. They call themselves the Koran Dominion, 19 planets. Bruno grunted. Did the other 18 have permits? They have armor that stops most things, Ray said. But it is jointed. Elbows, knees, neck, and the lens cluster on the helmet. That is where they are soft. Do not waste anything on the chest plate. How do you know? Gianni asked. Because I hit one in the chest and he laughed at me, and I hit one in the elbow and he stopped laughing. Marco leaned on his oar. What do we have? Rosa began to count on her fingers. 4,000 masks, 600 more upstairs. 2 water taxis and my cousin's transport barge, Gianni said. 3 if the starter behaves. A furnace at 1,080 degrees, Sofia said, and 900 kilos of glass in the melt. 200 kilos of ice, Bruno said. And 42 kilos of eel. Everybody looked at him. They are very fresh eels. That is not a weapon, Ray said. You have never carried a crate of them. Marco unrolled something on the table that was not a map. It was a tide table printed by the city, the kind every boatman in Venice keeps in his jacket. High water is at 340, he said. 105 centimeters, the square will flood at the edges. Then it goes out, and by 7 o'clock the lagoon north of San Michele will be 40 centimeters deep. Mud under that, 2 meters of mud. Ray looked at the table for a long moment. They're ground vehicles. They landed outside the Brickell, Marco said. Every one of them, they do not know the posts mean anything. They think the whole lagoon is water. It looks like water, Nico said. Everything in Venice looks like something, said Marco. Then Nico said, there is one more thing, and turned his laptop around again. He had the alien broadcast on the timeline, and underneath the translated voice was a wide, flat, pulsing band. That runs under everything they send. It is in every transmission. I think it is how they talk to each other and how their helmets know where they are. What frequency? Sofia asked. Low. Very low, it sits right about here. Nico tapped the display. Tomas Neri, who had not said a single word in 40 minutes, lifted his head. That is a B flat, he said. Everyone turned. You can hear that? Nico said. I am 74 and half deaf, and I spent 30 years standing underneath the largest bell in the city. I do not hear the note. I feel it in my teeth. He tapped the side of his jaw. That is a B flat, and it is flat by about a quarter tone, which is sloppy. Nico looked at Tomas, then at the wall of masks. Then back at his laptop. Ray Halstead recognized the expression immediately and put his hand over his eyes. No, he said. What? That is the look a young man gets right before he involves audio equipment in a military operation. Nico was already typing. The Marangona, what is her note? B flat, said Tomas. She has been a B flat since 1497. And the others? Which others? All of them, Nico looked up. How many bell towers are there in Venice? Tomas thought about it. In the old city, the islands, Murano, Burano, Torcello, the Giudecca, he shrugged. About 120. And they are all different notes. They are all different everything. They were cast 400 years apart by men who did not speak to each other. Nico sat back slowly. So if their whole network sits on one narrow band, he said, and we drop 120 untuned bells across it at full volume from stone towers. In a city where sound bounces off water, Sophia said what everybody was thinking. The bells are on electric motors, they cut the power. Tomas Neri stood up, and for the first time that day he looked pleased about something. The ropes are still there, he said. Outside, over the lagoon, the fog was thickening, and aboard the Sovereign Reach, Overseer Karn had run out of patience with a settlement that would not be frightened. Deploy the ground column, he said. All of it, move it through the settlement from the north. If they will not disperse, we will make dispersal the only option. Peth hesitated. Overseer. The terrain survey is incomplete. It is a city of decorated boats. Yes, Overseer. 12 armored walkers detached from the transports and stepped down into the lagoon north of the island, where the water was smooth and gray and looked exactly like the sea. Marco Bellini was waiting for them in a gondola. This was, by any reasonable military standard, the single stupidest thing anyone had done all day. He was one man in a wooden boat with an oar in front of 12 armored machines. He was also inside the brickle, and they were not. The lead walker spotted him and sent a challenge that the translator turned into halt and identify. Marco identified himself by turning the gondola and rowing north at a slow, unhurried, almost insulting pace. The column followed. Everything about a gondola looks slow. It is 35 feet of black wood. It draws about 25 centimeters of water, and it has been shaped for 1,000 years to do exactly one thing, which is to move over a lagoon that is barely there. The walkers weighed 11 tons each. Marco crossed the marked channel at the point where the posts split, took the eastern line, and kept going. The walkers, seeing water on both sides of the posts and no reason to prefer one over the other, went straight. 60 meters past the markers, the first walker stopped being a vehicle and became a monument. It sank to the knee joint, then the hip then stopped, canted at 11 degrees with its cooling vents in the mud. The pilot did what every pilot does. He tried to reverse. Reversing in Venetian lagoon mud is how you go down faster. The second walker moved to assist. The third moved to assist the second. By 3:30, 7 of the 12 were fixed in place, and the high tide was coming in behind them. Fiona, of course, was not there because this was not Scotland. What was there was Bruno Fanti in a transport barge with 200 kilos of crushed ice and 42 kilos of eel, and a plan he had explained to nobody because he suspected they would stop him. Ray Halstead, watching from the barge with Gianni, said, "What is he doing?" "He is opening the crates." "Why?" "He says the cooling vents are open." Ray considered this for a moment. "Is that a war crime?" "They landed on his father's table," Gianni said. "That is on them." The ice went in first, straight down the exposed intakes of the nearest walker. Then Bruno emptied the eel crates. What happened next was reported to the Sovereign Reach as an unidentified biological deployment. It was later corrected to a partially identified biological deployment. It was never fully identified because nobody aboard that walker was ever willing to describe it in a formal statement. At 3:40, the tide peaked. The eastern edge of St. Mark's Square went under 20 centimeters of water, as it does several times every winter. The Venetians in the square did what Venetians always do. They stepped up onto the raised wooden walkways that the city puts out, and they carried on. The corps and ground troops in the square did not have raised wooden walkways. Their armor was sealed and waterproof, which was fine. Their footing was not, because the paving stones of St. Mark's Square under 20 centimeters of water and 400 years of algae have the friction coefficient of buttered marble. Captain Drow gave the order to hold position, and then spent the next 90 seconds personally demonstrating why holding position was not currently available as an option. And then Rosa Vital opened her shutters. She and 9 other mask makers went out into the crowd with crates. They did not explain. They did not need to. In a city where everyone was already masked, handing out 4,000 more plain white bautas took 11 minutes. By 4 o'clock, the alien targeting network was looking at a square containing 40,000 identical blank faces, all moving, all human, all tagged as the same individual. Then Nico Bellini reached the sound desk, plugged in, and put the whole Carnival confetti cannon system on manual. Carnival uses coriandoli, which is not the light modern stuff. It is thick dyed paper, thrown by the fistful and fired by the sackful. Nico ran every cannon in the square at once. The confetti went up into the fog, and the fog came down into the confetti, and for the next 20 minutes the Coron ground force in St. Mark's Square could not see, could not target, could not identify, and could not stand up. Their thermal sensors found 40,000 humans. Their optical sensors found paper. Their audio filters found a brass band, because the Carnival brass band had not stopped playing, because nobody had told them to and they were being paid by the hour. Aboard the Sovereign Reach, analyst Peth read the incoming reports in a voice that got smaller with each line. Ground column immobilized in shallow terrain. Squad 9 still obstructed. Squad 4 is unaccounted for and last reported inside a beverage establishment. Targeting network is returning a single identity for the entire settlement. Captain Drowl reports the ground is overseer. I am reading it exactly as transmitted. The ground is winning. Karn stood up. Charge the cleansing beam. Peth turned. Overseer, our own ground forces are still deployed. They have been defeated by fishermen and paper. Overseer, the settlement is a designated cultural site of the local species. Our own protocols on 19 worlds have... Charge it. The 3 spines under the Sovereign Reach began to glow. In the square, Sofia Conti saw the light gathering and grabbed Nico by the arm. Marco Bellini's gondola came in hard against the Riva. He climbed out with his left sleeve burned through and a long red mark up his forearm where a bolt had passed close enough to blister him, and he did not mention it to anybody, then or ever. He looked up at the ship, then at Nico. How long do you need? Nico's mouth was dry. 4 minutes, maybe 5. You have 3, said Marco. Run. There are 323 steps to the top of the St. Mark's Campanile, and they are not stairs. They are a ramp coiling up inside the brick, built that way so that in the old days a man could ride a horse to the top. Nico Bellini went up them carrying a laptop, a coil of cable, and a captured Coron transmitter unit that Ray Halstead had cut out of Sergeant Vex's helmet with a bread knife. Tomas Neri went up behind him at his own speed, which was the speed of a 74-year-old man who had climbed that ramp 4,000 times and did not intend to hurry on the 4,001st. Gianni Moro was already on the water with a list. The list was 118 bell towers. Every parish church in the old city, every campanile on Murano, Burano, and Torcello the Giudecca, San Giorgio. Some had priests, some had caretakers. Some had a single old woman with a key who had been ringing that bell since before the war and had opinions about who else was allowed to touch it. Gianni did not have time to explain anything to any of them, so he said the only sentence that would work. Marco Bellini says, ring it. Now, everything, do not stop. Nobody argued, not one. At the top of the campanile, the great bell hung in the fog, and the light from the ship above turned the whole chamber blue. Tomas took hold of the manual rope. She has not been swung by hand in 31 years, he said. Will she still work? She is bronze, said Tomas. She does not know what a year is. Nico spliced the transmitter into his laptop, patched the audio input from the microphone he had clipped inside the bell chamber, and set the output to loop straight back into the Coron carrier band. It was, in engineering terms, the crudest thing he had ever built. It was a microphone, a laptop, and an enemy radio, wired together on a stone floor with tape. Ready, he said. Tomas pulled. The Marangona is more than 2 meters across and weighs close to 4 tons. She does not start quickly. The first pull moved her a hand's width. The second moved her more. On the 5th, the clapper came home. The note went out over Venice, and 117 other bells answered. They were not in tune with each other. They had never been in tune with each other. They had been cast in different centuries by different foundries for different parishes who had actively disliked one another, and they came in ragged and overlapping and enormous, bouncing off water and stone and marble, filling every canal in the city at once. And Nico Bellini fed all of it, raw, straight into the Coron command network. On the bridge of the Sovereign Reach, every display went white. Karn clutched at the side of his console. What is that? Peth was shouting over it. Overseer, it is in the carrier band. It is in all of it. The harmonic spread is. It is not one signal. It is over 100 separate sources. We cannot filter it. We cannot isolate it. Then find the origin. Overseer, the origin is the city. The cleansing beam lost stabilization at 11 seconds. It discharged sideways across the lagoon and boiled 200 meters of empty water into steam. Navigation went at 19 seconds. Karn ordered full reverse thrust. The order arrived at the port engine cluster as an unbroken wall of bronze, and the port engine shut itself down. The starboard engine, receiving nothing at all, went to maximum. The Sovereign Reach, half a kilometer of it, turned slowly and majestically to the left, dropped its nose, and went into the lagoon north of San Michel. It did not sink. That was the thing that nobody in the Coran Dominion ever quite recovered from. It came down outside the Brickle, in 40 centimeters of water and 2 meters of mud, and it stopped with more than half of its hull still sticking up into the fog. Tilted at an angle of about 15 degrees, absolutely and permanently stuck. The water was not deep enough to hide it. The mud was too deep to pull it out of. There is no salvage vessel on Earth with a draft shallow enough to reach it, and there never will be, because to get to it you would have to be a gondola. The bells kept going for another 6 minutes, because nobody had thought to tell 118 bell ringers how to stop. The last Coran holdouts made it as far as Murano. 11 soldiers, armor scorched, weapons half dead, came ashore at the glass foundries at 6 in the evening looking for shelter and a working transport. Sophia Conti met them at the door of her workshop with her furnace at 1,080 degrees and a 2-meter iron ladle in her hands. "You cannot come in," she said. The lead soldier raised his weapon. "Move aside. There is molten glass in here," he fired. The bolt hit the crucible housing, and 900 kilos of glass at 1,000 degrees came out across the floor in a slow, bright river. Sophia had already stepped up onto the raised working platform, because that platform is there specifically because glass foundries are places where things eventually go wrong. And every glassmaker in Murano has known that for 700 years. The Coran had not been in the building for 7 seconds. They came back out of it considerably faster, with their leg armor glowing, and rolled into the canal, where the water put them out and the mud held them until somebody came with a rope. When Overseer Karn walked down the ramp of his grounded flagship at 7:40 that evening, the fog had cleared, the tide was going out. And the entire population of Venice appeared to be standing on the water's edge in masks. Marco Bellini was at the front with his oar. Elena Rossi was beside him holding a clipboard. Ray Halstead had a captured rifle in one hand and absolutely no expression on his face. Bruno Fanti was still covered in ice. Rosa Vital had brought a mask, in case anyone needed one. Tomas Neri stood at the back, breathing hard, 74 years old with rope burns across both palms. Karn's damaged helmet translated the scene for him as hostile coordinated population, unknown command structure, acoustic warfare capability. It was the first fully accurate report anyone in the Dominion had filed all day. He set his weapon down on the stones. "We wish to negotiate," he said. Elena Rossi stepped forward and looked at her clipboard. "You damaged my ceiling," she said. "You broke a photograph of my father. You landed on a stall that a man has been waiting 9 years for permission to keep. And you have put a spaceship in the lagoon, which is a protected area, and which you will have noticed is quite shallow." Karn's translator worked through this. "You are listing property damage. I am reading an invoice. We came here to take your world." "Yes," said Elena, "but you did not fill in anything." Bruno pushed forward. "You do not have a permit. A permit. For the Riva for a commercial vehicle over 3 tons, I have applied 9 times, 9. And you come down from space and you land on my table, and I ask you, where is the paperwork?" Karn looked at Marco Bellini, because Marco was the only one who had not said anything. And because in every species, there is usually one person who is quiet for a reason. "What are your terms?" Karn said. Marco leaned on his oar. "Put everything back the way you found it." Karn looked out at his flagship, sitting in the mud with half its hull in the air. He looked at the 12 walkers standing in the lagoon like a row of very expensive statues. He looked at the smoke still coming off Murano. "That is not possible," he said. "Yes," said Marco. "Now you understand the problem. There was a long silence, and then Karn asked the question that ended up in the tribunal record and in 19 languages, and eventually in the Dominion's own training material. "Why did you not run?" Marco Bellini looked at him for a moment. Then he pointed at the ground and at the water and at the 400 bridges behind him. "Where would we go?" he said. "There are no roads." The Italian authorities arrived at 9 that night. The international response arrived at dawn. Commander Dean Whittaker, United States Navy, came in off a destroyer in the Adriatic with a joint liaison team and a very clear set of instructions that turned out to be useless within 4 minutes of stepping onto the Riva. He found 91 Coran soldiers locked in a Carnival costume warehouse. He found 6 landing craft in the lagoon. He found an interstellar command ship stuck in the mud with tourists already taking photographs of it, and one man selling coffee from a folding table beside it who had somehow obtained a permit overnight, which nobody has ever been able to explain. "Who is in charge here?" Whittaker asked. 11 people pointed in 11 different directions. He tried again. "Who organized the defense?" "That depends," said Alina. "Is there compensation?" "Compensation for what?" "For my ceiling." "And my stall," said Bruno. "And my crucible," said Sophia. 900 kilos of glass on the floor in one piece cooling. "Do you know what it takes to get that out of a floor?" "You fired the shot that hit it," Gianni said. "He fired the shot. You told him to fire it." "I told him there was glass in there." "That is a warning. That is the opposite of telling him to fire it." Commander Whittaker slowly took off his cap. "Perhaps," he said, "we should start with the alien commander." They found Karn sitting on an upturned crate under the campanile, guarded by Tomas Neri, who was standing beside the bell rope and occasionally putting a hand on it. Every time he did, Karn flinched. Whittaker looked up at the tower. "How did you bring down the ship?" Nico held up a laptop, a roll of tape, and a coil of speaker cable. "Bells," he said. Whittaker looked at the equipment for a long moment and decided that this was a conversation for somebody with a higher clearance and a much stronger drink. The official report described the event as coordinated civilian resistance supported by improvised electronic countermeasures, local terrain exploitation, and captured enemy technology. The people of Venice described it as Saturday. The Coran Dominion withdrew from Earth within 30 hours. Their surviving vessels broadcast a single advisory across the entire Dominion, and it was short, because Karn wrote it himself and did not feel like explaining. Island System 14, Northern Coastal Zone, Sector Venice. Do not deploy ground armor. The water is a lie. The population cannot be identified, cannot be frightened, and cannot be outrun, because there is nowhere for them to run to. Under no circumstances allow the bells to begin. If the bells begin, you are already too late. If you enjoyed this one, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment, whether it was the eels, the masks, or Tomas on that rope. And share this video with someone who needs to hear about the day 118 church bells beat a starship. It genuinely helps more than you know. The aftermath was, in the Venetian style, mostly administrative. The sovereign reach is still in the lagoon. 3 separate international bodies have now confirmed that it cannot be moved without draining a protected wetland, and draining a protected wetland requires an environmental review. And the environmental review has been scheduled. It is expected to conclude sometime in the next 20 years, which, in a city that spent 5 decades building a flood barrier, is considered brisk. Within a month, there were boat tour. Within 2 months, there was a second boat tour, run by a rival family, claiming that the first tour was going to the wrong side. Elena Rossi repaired her ceiling and hung a cracked Coran helmet above her bar. Underneath it, she put a small handwritten card that said, "First customer in 26 years to leave without paying." Bruno Fanti rebuilt his stall out of hull plating cut from a landing craft, which is stainless, waterproof, and entirely indestructible. The city informed him that the new stall was significantly larger than the one on his original application, and that he would need to reapply. He is reapplying. It is going about as well as before. Sofia Conti got her crucible out of the floor in one piece, cooled it, cut it, and now sells small blue glass discs to visitors. She does not say what the color came from. People assume it is a special mix. It is a special mix. Rosa Vidal's workshop sold out of plain white bottom masks for 3 years straight, and she raised the price twice and nobody complained once. Gianni Morrow finally fixed his starter, using a component from an alien landing craft, and it has not failed since. He refuses to say which component. He says if he tells people, they will want one. Marco Bellini went back on the water the following Tuesday. He never had the burn on his arm treated properly, and he never mentioned it, and when tourists ask about the scar, he tells them it was a boiler. And Tomas Neri received a letter of commendation from 3 governments for what one of them described, in writing, as the first successful acoustic disruption of an interstellar command network in human history. He read it twice, framed it, and hung it in Alina's bar. Then he ordered a glass of wine and complained that the bells had been rung badly, that at least 40 of them had come in late, and that the campanile at San Barnaba had been out of time since 1986. Ray Halstead raised his glass toward the helmet on the wall. "Do you think they will come back?" Outside, the fog was coming in off the lagoon. A vaporetto went past. Somewhere in the dark, a hull the size of a cathedral sat in the mud at 15 degrees, waiting for a review board. From the kitchen, Alina called out, "Tell them they are barred." Marco lifted his glass. "No," he said. They learned. Far beyond Earth, the Koran Dominion quietly rewrote the first page of its invasion manual. One sentence now appears at the top of every planetary assessment, before the population figures, before the defense estimate, before anything else. A people with nowhere to run are not harmless. They are simply out of options, and out of options is where the dangerous ones live.